Can we calm down? We want to begin. We're ready. Our wonderful filmmaker.
Okay, I don't have one.
Shall continue.
So please welcome Nanfu Wang.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming on a Friday rainy night. Yeah. I'm so happy to see so many people here.
I'm sure that people want to ask questions about the film, but I kind of like to start with asking Nanfu to tell you about how she got to the United States and to NYU journalism program, and what was her path out of rural China?
So I lived my whole life in China until 2011. That's when I came to the US. And I was born in a very small, remote farming village in China, in Jiangxi province. If there are Chinese people here, you would know. And my parents, my entire family lived in that village for many, many generations. And my family was extremely poor in a way that we didn't have TV. We didn't have TV until I was a teenager. And especially my dad, he passed away when I was 12. So all of a sudden, the finance of the family collapsed. And my mom told me that I couldn't continue going to school because I also had a younger brother. He was 8 at the time. And in that kind of society, they thought, as a girl, you don't have to have much education, and all you need to start working and then hopefully find a good husband. So I started working when I was 16, and I really wanted to go back to college, especially all my friends, they came back and then told me about high schools and college, which I didn't have access to. And in China, if you don't go to high school, there's no way for you to go to college because there is a national college exam. And so I ended up taking, there is a unique system called self-taught program, and you can read a list of books and you enroll into the self-taught program exam. So I was reading books and then eventually took some exam and got an equivalent bachelor degree, but it wasn't recognized. But with that bachelor degree, I was able to apply to graduate school. And in 2007, I got into Shanghai University, the graduate program to study literature. And it was the first time I went to the big city in Shanghai, and the first time I had a computer in my life. And I started watching movies. And really, I think it blew my mind, all those movies, because it allowed me to visit places that I didn't go physically, and it allowed me to understand culture and people I've never heard of. So it was then I started thinking I wanted to travel to the world. I wanted to see what the world looks like. And in 2011, I got into a graduate school in Ohio University, and my major was media studies. And that was my first contact with media. And literally, I started from scratch, learning print, TV, video, advertisement, and also film. So after a year studying there, and I realized I wanted to do documentary. And I remember it was there that I watched the first documentaries in my life. Even though that I watch films in China, but the access to documentaries was really limited. And when I started seeing documentary films in Ohio, I felt like it just blew my mind that how they could be so compelling, even more compelling sometimes than fiction films. And then I applied to NYU, a 1.5-year program to study news and documentary. And 6 months before I graduated, I went back to China trying to make my first film, and that was Hooligan Sparrow.
how did you know about Sparrow, and how did you make contact with her so she agreed this?
Yeah. I knew about her a long time ago from social media and from a lot of coverage on her. And I knew that she was so famous of using her own body and nudity to do activism. And also, I think really what caught my attention was the free sex campaign that she did, the free sex for migrant workers. And that was then I thought what kind of woman she was, so brave. And also I wasn't sure really what her purpose was, because it was a lot of controversy about the coverage on her, people criticizing her, people praising her. So when I was going back to China to make a film, at the time I had an idea of making a film about sex workers, especially the poor sex workers who were from rural areas. And I contacted her hoping that she would be the person who introduced me to that world, which otherwise I might not get access to. Explained. When I called her for the first time from New York, I said, I agree with your message that sex work should be legalized, and I wanted to do a film on those people. Would you be willing to introduce me to them? And she said, well, come back to China and we can talk then. And I returned to China, and I called her the first day I got there. And she didn't answer the phone call, and I called again, and she was evasive. She wasn't willing to tell me anything, and she just said that I'm not at home, and I don't know when I would be home, and I cannot promise you anything. And I asked what she was doing, and she couldn't tell me. And I asked, well, would you at least tell me where you are? Eventually, she told me, well, I'm in Guangzhou City. And it was then on the phone, I quickly said, I'm here too. Such a coincidence. And then she was surprised, and she said, well, since you are here, I asked if we can meet. And she suggested a time the next day. And I wasn't there that time. I was 400 miles away, and I took overnight bus to get there the next day. And when I finally met her, I found out that she was planning for the protest. And that's why she couldn't say anything on the phone, and she wouldn't tell me anything. And when I learned about the protest, because at the time I already read so much about the rape case from the media, and I knew it was very controversial and there must be something behind it. So I volunteered to go to the protest to find out more.
And to prepare for this film about sex workers, what kind of equipment did you take? To China?
I was a poor student, so I didn't have budget. I couldn't afford anything. Most of my equipment I checked out from NYU because I was still a student there. And I had a DSLR camera. It wasn't even the best DSLR. It was Canon 60D. And I didn't have a tripod, a few lenses, and then an audio recorder. So I went, and that's basically it. But at the protest, gradually I realized that how difficult it was to even film. And because as soon as I took out the camera, then there would be people coming to me. So I started doing research, what kind of a hidden camera that was available. And if you do a Google, in China, Google wasn't available, so a search on the internet, there was a lot of hidden cameras available. And they were pen-shaped or watch-shaped or button-shaped, all different kinds. But because it was summer, so it made that even more difficult because I couldn't wear anything that would draw much attention. I didn't have a place to hide a pen or to watch, but constantly raise this level and film. So eventually, I thought that process would be a good idea because at the eye level, it would get the best footage from that level, and it would be during the least attention. I was hoping that because you could wear glasses, everybody could wear glasses, but in the scene that you saw that they noticed, actually the police had training and they have those kind of glasses themselves. So, and also it was huge. It was black, huge. So it was quite noticeable. And,
How much footage did you manage to get out?
I didn't lose that much footage. It was only that day in front of the court. And even that day, I already anticipated that something would happen because it was a high-profile court case and a lot of civilians was there. So that morning when I went, I knew something was going to happen. So I've already, at that point, I already had smuggled most of my footage out of China through different times. And that day when I went to film, I had prepared many empty memory cards. And I thought about I would film like an hour or half an hour and switch to an empty cards and then hide the card that has information on it. And so if anything happened, the damage would be minimal. So eventually when they took my camera, it wasn't that much footage. It was like a few hours of footage. Yeah.
And then when you came back, how long did it take you to edit? And what made you decide to start the film at the end of your trip with preparing to meet the authorities?
You mean the opening scene?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I came back, I think on August 25th. And then I started editing in September very soon. And it took about 6 months or so to get to a rough cut. But at the time, it wasn't like full-time editing. I was still graduating. But when I graduated, it was like, then I had to find a job to survive. I was working on 2-day jobs and then also editing the film at nights or weekends. And in terms of the choice of putting the end beginning was because when I watch movies, it was always the kind of non-linear stories that attracted me most. I always like stories that need you to think more and then to piece together the story by the end of the film or something like that. So I was editing the film, and before I edited it, I started writing on paper of a sort of like a timeline of the events, what happened over the course of the 3 months. And it turned out that the storyline was that not linear, and it was not one simple storyline. There is a story of Sparrow that she went to the protest, that she was evicted, and then this happened to her. And there was a story of the rape case that the parents were silenced, and then eventually the principal were persecuted. And then there is a story of media, how traditional media distorted the story, and the reporters, whether they were silenced too, or they kind of didn't tell the full story. And then the social media, how that challenged the censorship in China. And then there is a story of myself that my family and friends got interrogated, and myself too, shows the scale of the surveillance and how far the government would go to silence anybody. So it was different stories and how to tell all of those stories. And I started thinking it's really complicated. And I wanted people to be able to watch the film and eventually have a full sense of not a messy story, but like understand the different levels of complexities. And when I was editing and went through all the footage, and the last day of me being interrogated, it was natural to me that explained, because I lied to them, and that kind of opened up the full story. That's how I chose that as an opening.
And I'm sure people want to know, is Sparrow still living in her family village? And also, there's been a lot of coverage about the lawyer and what has happened to the lawyer. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Sparrow, she moved out of the village because there wasn't anything that she could do to make a living in that village. She's now living in the city. And her passport was confiscated by the government in November 2014. So she has been prohibited from traveling since then. And even when she travels within China, she would receive phone calls from the local government officials asking where she's going and what she's doing. And she's really restricted from doing any on-the-ground campaign activism. But she's actively speaking out on the internet. She writes every other day, and she has a blog, like a channel that has a huge followers, where she writes about social issues, social injustice. And lawyer Wang Yu's case was really outrageous. She was arrested in July 2015 at her home, and at the same day, her husband was taking their son, who was 16-year-old, to the airport because he was accepted to a school in Austria and was leaving that day. And both her husband and her son were detained at the airport. And her son's passport was taken by the government, and still he hasn't gotten back yet. And while both the parents are still in jail and formally charged with subverting the government, which is a charge would give them anywhere between 15 years in jail or life sentence. And their son, the 16-year-old boy, now is under house arrest. And recently, lawyer Wang, because since her arrest, there was a lot of campaigning outside of China to trying to get her released. And recently, she was awarded by the American Bar Association the Human Rights Award, and the award ceremony was scheduled to be on August 6th. And although she couldn't be there to take the awards, but they are still going to hold the ceremony. But a day before the award ceremony, the Chinese released a videotaped confession of Wang Yu. So she was saying on camera that she was guilty and she took foreign support, foreign funds, and foreign forces to subvert the Chinese government. And she said, I refuse the help of any international community and the governments. I refuse this award if the American government and the American Bar Association insisted on giving me this award is a violation of my human rights. So that made it really difficult for any international community to openly campaigning for her freedom, because it's her own words, even though that anybody who knows her could tell that she would never speak in that way, and it was almost like a robber reading something. And after that confession, the government said that she was released on bail, but so far nobody could contact her and nobody knew where she is. So her situation is still known.
Why don't we open this for questions out here? I'm sure people have many questions. Anita.
How is Weiwei and
Actually, we're going to pass this around.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Can you guys share? Is that okay?
Yeah, we will share.
You can go.
Ai Weiwei is a very good friend of Hooligan Sparrows. They've done a lot of activism together. And when Sparrow was kidnapped and abandoned along the highway that day, she took a photo and she posted on Twitter. And a lot of the activist community saw that photo, and Ai Weiwei was one of them, and he saw it. He called her immediately and asked her what happened. And Sparrow told him, and he said, what are you going to do with all those stuff? And she said she didn't know. She didn't have much money to deal with those things. And so Ai Weiwei said, I give you money, and why don't you ship all those belongings to my studio in Beijing? And little did we know what he was going to do at the moment. It was about, I think, 6 months later after I came back to the US, and I heard that he had asked people who are in his studio to open everything in the suitcases, in the boxes, and then took a photo of each item, which is about, I think, 6,000 photos, and then put them back and reassemble them to reconstruct the scene of along the highway. And then that exhibition, her belongings toured around 5 capital cities in 5 countries. It was in Paris, Tokyo, and New York, London, and another one, I don't remember, yeah.
Someone else? Yeah. Yep. Oh.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to ask how you finally were able to smuggle your footage out.
Yeah, that was a challenge because I couldn't ship it. So eventually I had to ask my friends and friends who were coming to the US either to study or to travel, and they took the hard drive with them personally, and it took different people a few times to take all the footage out.
I have 2 questions. First one just came out when you talk about Ai Weiwei's project, because I was wondering, what do you think the purpose of Ai Weiwei to help like Sparrow? Because he took the stuff for his own project. It's not for me. It's not sounds like a real help. And the second question is, do you ever think about play this film in China? Because I know it's really hard to play the film in China, but the main concern in this film, you're focused on like feminism in China. So I think the film should be played in China. Do you ever think about that? So I guess the question is, what's your purpose in this film? It's not only for like the film festival, right? So yeah.
That's good questions, and I'm glad to hear that from Chinese. The first question was Ai Weiwei's purpose of doing the art exhibition. Well, I cannot speak for him because I have never talked to him and I have never met him in person, and it's only my assumption. So I couldn't speak for him, but I think it's like any other kind of art form. One of the purposes is to raise awareness. And Ai Weiwei is well known, is really one of the most prominent activists or artists from China that the international community recognize. And because what he did, people definitely had more awareness about China and the human rights situation in China. And then I think in that sense, his work about Ye Haiyan's belongings had definitely raised awareness, even though people might not know the full story of it. And in terms of what concrete help that achieved, if you ask Ye Haiyan herself, she was appreciative to that because it was one of the most difficult times of her life that somebody had helped her, even though that the thing eventually became art. But at the time, for her, it was a big help. And the second question, yeah, of course I hope the film will be seen in China. One thing that really saddened me was information was really restricted in China, and my generation or younger, we grew up not knowing what Tiananmen Square protest was. Have never heard of it, a lot of us. And before I made this film, I did not know anything about this. I had no idea this was happening. Even though that I wasn't naive, I was aware of the corruption, the censorship, but the censorship was an abstract idea. It was not tangible. It wasn't something that you could see or you could feel. And when it's abstract, you don't know what they censor and you don't know why they censor. So everything was surprising to me. And still, the majority of the people in China don't know. And when I talked about the film to some of my best friends who are still in China, they would not believe it. They would even question, what have changed you? You have moved to the US for 5 years. Now you are really brainwashed by the Western culture, which is the very common criticism the Chinese government often say that how the Western media was trying to subvert the Chinese government. And for films like this, there were a lot of criticism in China that people, rather than rethink what they saw on media was true or not, they question what's the purpose of the filmmaker to shame China. Was they sponsored by any American or international funders? That's why they were doing this. And there were a lot of skepticism and cynicism. And that's something that really, I think, made me more sadder than the violence from the state, because it's all people I know and I'm friends with. And even some of my friends who study in the US, which you would assume that they have more access to information and would have an open mind. But I think because of the over 20 years of education, and a lot of them would say, why do you have to show this film outside of China? If there is a problem within China, you should get to the upper level government and solve it within China rather than create a negative image of our country. And a lot of people misunderstood the idea of the government, country. They think by creating the positive image of the country, then you also need to protect the image of the government. They equal the two. And that's something that I think it would take a long time for people to change that perception. And yes, I am working on getting the film shown in China. As you all notice that the voiceover is in English. That was because when I was making the film and also editing the film, I realized that it would be very difficult to show it, have it shown in China officially and publicly. And the only way for Chinese people even to hear about it, it would be for it to have enough exposure outside of China. Then the words would travel back to China and people would hear from international media and would be curious what this is about. And then they would want to see it. At least there would be a desire or curiosity. And right now we have just I have just recorded a Chinese voiceover and made the Chinese version. And we're gonna send the copy back. And Chinese people are really good at circulating the film underground, and I have hope that they would see it. A lot of people would see it.
Hi, I'm a Chinese, and I don't really have a question. I just want to say thank you with all my respectful. And I'm from a really small city too, and I could imagine how hard it can be. I've learned stories, I've seen video footages, and learned about all the protests from China, from even a long time before, and it's really scary, and it deserves to be all the justice. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just, of course, I want to say thank you, and right now I'm very interested in the progress and development in terms of, say, activist or feminist activist training in China. So, what do you have any introduction about? Are there, say, groups of people? And how to be able to, say, do a good documentary about things? Of course, Wang would be example, but sure.
You mean how filmmakers, if they wanted to go to make films about activism? And I think, several things. First, definitely try to protect yourself and protect footage. There are a lot of filmmakers who are doing films in China that are sensitive. And Huang actually is an example. He bought us a camera, and after I left, he spent a year traveling across the country and interviewing political prisoners who were released after being in jail for over 20 years from the time of Tiananmen Square protest. And he had interviewed 50 people around the entire country and terabytes of footage. And one night, the police broke into his house and then took not only all the footage, but all his laptop, camera, everything. And I think that was very devastating to any filmmaker or anybody who spent so much time and poured in his heart in there to do that. And that was one of my biggest fear when I was making it too. Like there were times that I was afraid of my personal safety, but as long as I had the footage and I had my camera and I was able to film, somehow I felt like I had the power and I had the weapon. And eventually, if I show the film, I show the footage, it was my revenge. But the fear is if I don't have that, I'm completely hopeless and felt powerless. So I think really learn to protect equipment footage and also yourself. And the other thing is have a strategy. When we were in front of the court, Huang and I, two of us was there. And later, when we got away and we were joking, if we had known that was what was going to happen, we would have prepared better. We could, for example, I could film from the streets, and he could stand across the street far away and film me. And if there is a confrontation between me and the police, he would be capturing it. And we could have a third person stationed like somewhere in the building high up, and then if he got in trouble, then that person could film that. So we were thinking if we had known, I think have a strategy would help too. Like the plan to get out of the place, the plan if there is any emergency and how you're gonna do it.
Well, first I want to say how much I greatly admire the work you've done and all the risks that you took. It's really incredible. And I have kind of a naive question maybe, but I'm just wondering if there's something that we as viewers can now do to support Hooligan Sparrow's work or put pressure on the government to release the lawyer, or what can we do?
A lot of international community organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have done a lot of work, and there were a lot of coverage. But right now, Chinese government did not respond to the naming and shaming and everything. No matter what's reported, they just don't respond and they ignore, which is really frustrating because it's hard to find an effective way for them to respond. But that being said, I think there still should be enough that kind of naming and shaming and pointing out what they did wrong, especially from the governmental level. And if the government, for example, the US government, could prioritize human rights issues rather than economy when they were dealing the relationship with China, then I think the situation would be much better. And I have hopes that they could one day would do that, but it's not something that I feel like I know how to push. And I wish like the U.S. government, the high level, the policymakers could see the film and could have the empathy and compassion towards people in China and address their policy. And on a smaller level, I think for us or ordinary people and to help them, there are several ways. One concrete way is we have set up a fund for the kids of human rights activists, for example, Yaxin and lawyer Wang Yu's son, because they are all teenagers, but because of their parents' activism, they've been suspended from school multiple times. And Yaxin wasn't able to go to school. And not only that, when they moved to a new city and Sparrow tried to enroll her to a new city school, the school's administration would check her name and tell Sparrow, we cannot accept her, and you know the reason better than we do. So government was so powerful that they could tell the school not to take them. And my hope is all those kids that they could get access to education. So there is a charitable fund, and if you go to hooligansparrow.com, you will be able to donate to their education fund. And at the same time, if you can share the information about the film for more people to see it, I think during the Tiananmen Square protest, the American public had protested with the U.S. government how they should have a strong policy against China, and that worked. And if enough American public would tell your government one way or another human rights issues, not only like in China, that I think if we ignore what's happening in China and in many other countries, you cannot enjoy full democracy here too. It's not that much better. Like, we share more similarities than differences.
Hi, Nanfu. Thank you so much. I applaud you for your bravery. And this is the second time I've seen this film because I catched it when it first premiered, and I still get the adrenaline rush. So thank you. One question or one point that I was curious about your film was your decision in filming Hooligan Sparrow's parents, and what is the significance of putting their image in there, because I assume that there would be, safety issues, and because you shot quite a bit of the landscape of their hometown as well. So I was wondering if you're okay, and if you ever worried about that.
Well, I think there is a misunderstanding. China is quite unique. Like, for example, a lot of international organizations would think about protect the privacy of people, human rights defenders, for example, and protect the family members, their information. But in China, the truth is always government knows more than anybody else knows. Like, they knows every of your family members' number, information, where they work, who you went to college with. They know everything. And I have had conversations with the activists, and they, for example, before I started filming, I had asked them, how do you feel about being in the film? And they thought that exposure actually, ironically, kept them safer than not being exposed, because government is able to make anybody disappear overnight. But if the whole world is paying attention to somebody, then it's much harder for them to make somebody disappear, because they then have to make a response. And that's the case with Ai Weiwei too. Every move the government does to him, the next day will be on New York Times. And that kind of deter the government from doing anything extreme. And with Sparrow's mother, I respected Sparrow's, asked me not to film anymore. But that, it's okay for her to be this much, and she said it's okay. And the reason that she didn't want me to film her was because she was afraid that the village people would see that I was filming her mother. And because she would let me film in front of her house, really, it's just the area that she moves around. But if I go to film her mother, then village that people probably had never seen a camera, never seen media, they became curious, and they asked why you are filming her. And she also didn't want me to interview her mom, because she was afraid that her mom would know more about her activism and couldn't understand and would worry. And that's also the relationship I have with my mom. My mom doesn't know much about this film, and she's hoping I could go back to China and kept asking me, when are you coming back and when are you coming back? And I couldn't tell her I can't go back because I'm afraid that if I go back I won't be able to leave, or I'm afraid that I just can't go. But I don't want her to worry about this, and I didn't tell her the film is shown here and there, and these are the consequences. And we talk about life, we talk about food and clothes and the basics. And that's true, I think, with a lot of Chinese people. They are not participating in politics. And yeah.
You had a question? Anybody else?
First of all, I just want to say thank you again. My parents grew up in a small rural village, and I moved to Canada when I was 6. So, sorry, I'm just emotional. But part of learning about my culture has been accepting the good parts of the culture, but also being skeptical and being aware of the things that happen in the country. My mom went to the Tiananmen protest, but when I was younger, she would tell me that they censored it. People in China don't know about this thing that has happened. And for me, that was very mind-boggling because I grew up in Canada. So as I was saying, I guess a lot of the reason why people don't activism or don't engage in politics is because they're busy trying to make a better life for their children and just daily things. And I just wanted to say thank you, but also just the process of learning about a country is in the good parts and the bad parts. And I was just wondering, I was gonna ask if you had been back to China, but also has the government responded, or have they known that you took this footage, or just anything in response to your work? Yeah.
Thank you. The government had responded. The first response was when Sundance announced the lineup of the films, had the press release. So that was the first time officially that the film was finished and people knew that there was a film coming out. And there was a news segment on CCTV the next day, and the anchor was saying somebody had made a film about the Hainan rape case, and it will be shown at the Sundance Film Festival. And let's take a look at what is Sundance Film Festival. So the anchor pulled out of some images of people standing in the snow, looking really cold and miserable. And the anchor continued saying that Sundance Film Festival is a film festival for independent filmmakers with low budget, make shitty films that were not were rarely seen by people. And then they continue saying, let's take a look at who Nanfu Wang is, and the director. And they did some search, and then the screen shows the action, the search, and there wasn't much information about me. And they were like, we couldn't even find any previous work. Of course, she's very not known filmmaker. And they then searched the title of the film, and there was no trailer, no poster. It was part of also our strategy at the point, not putting anything out. And they were like, we couldn't find any poster and trailer. Of course, it's a shitty film. And so that was the first, and I found it very amusing. And then later, as more people saw the film, and there were some Chinese audiences who, because in China we don't necessarily have Google, Facebook, Twitter, or anything, but we have Chinese version of anything. And there is also Chinese version of IMDb. And some audiences went on that website and created a page for the film and wrote reviews, and then those were deleted a few days later.
So lastly, I was just curious, when she was in detainment and the other activists were in her apartment, why did that one activist want your hard drive?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. There's no way of proving anything. And that's also one thing in the activist community too, because it was very clear that there were certain activists who were paid by the government to monitor their fellow activists and to report to the government. And a lot of activists knew that, and because they would have a meeting and talk about things where their plans, and then soon the government would find out. And sometimes it was really hard for them to even find out who was that person reported, and they would have guests among themselves, and they would say, like, one thing that they would try to speculate was, look, all of us, 5 of us have been jailed. That only person, for the past 5 years, never went to the detention center. So maybe that was because of I. So, but nobody had any evidence.
And just one last question. Is the youth within China interested in making a greater change and being more politically aware?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Is the youth in China interested in becoming more politically aware and creating this greater change?
It's interesting because when I was in China, I was really naive and I didn't know much. I didn't know anything. I was ignorant. And a lot of people who are younger than me probably know even less. A lot of people have never heard of Ai Weiwei, which you think is so famous outside of China. And a lot of people had no access to. A lot of people had no access to Google, YouTube, anything. When you grew up in a world like that, and when you don't know what you don't know what to look for. I don't know if it makes sense.
It does.
When I was talking to my friends and we would have argument, and I would say, it's terrible that you don't have Google and you don't know what you miss. You only see the information that you can. And my friends would say, but I think my life is content and I don't miss anything. I could find the music I want to find. I could do everything that I want to. Yeah, you don't know what you have missed when you don't know the world exists.
Anybody else?
Hi, I just want to ask you a question because I've seen different sequences of you choose on journalism in China, like different traditional media and also online media. So I just want to know what's your take on the journalism in China to spreading news like this? Do you still have faith in them, or I just want to know from you, a journalist student here.
When I came to the U.S. was because I was very disappointed at the journalism in China, and I always felt like it wasn't the full story. But after making this movie and I witnessed some of those reporters who interviewed Sparrow, and then some of the report did come out, and the report that come out was very surprising. As Yaxin said, it wasn't even slightly true to the reality. It was very distorted. Sometimes it's the opposite. And what happened was there were really different levels of censorship. Someone who first broke the story of Hainan rape case was a reporter in Hainan, and a week later, after the case circulated so widely, he was fired. He was fired from the place he worked at. And then, among all the reporters who came to interview Sparrow, some of them I really respect, who are great journalists, who did investigative reporting and who worked really hard, who would follow Sparrow from one place to another and travel to get the full story, and who asked 8 hours of questions and trying to get all the details, and I had a lot of respect for them. But that reporter went back and was told that by her editor that she wasn't allowed to write about the story. She wasn't allowed to publish it, even write about it. So the media, the censorship worked as first when the story came out, and then as it got more and more attention, then the government tried to control or to lead the discussion, to direct the media. Then there were distorted reporting. But when even that was controversial and people were skeptical towards what they read or heard, then there was a ban from the propaganda department, which is a real department in China. It's called the propaganda department, which oversees all the media, and there would be a ban that all the media agency cannot report on certain issue, and not only that, like distorted way or what, like you simply cannot write about Sparrow or write about Hainan rape case. And I think that's really challenging for any journalists or reporters who wanted to do a good job, because they are in the environment that even if they wanted to, they can't do it. But I think I'm hopeful with the social media and citizen journalism, because this really allowed them a platform to tell the story and to circulate the information, even though the posts would be deleted very, very shortly after they were published. But still, there was a time window between it existed online and it got deleted, and that was the short time window that people can access to the information.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask the same question with him, because I went to journalism and like communication media study for my bachelor degree in Korea, and as you already answered, so I just want to say, like, because in Korea we have kind of similar problem, even though we are kind of democrat, country. Like in 1960s, we had this president, like he's a dictator. Now we have this president who's a daughter of him. So it's like, so we still have the press, like media playing by government, and there's a lot of movies against to the government, but the government, they kind of press them to not make the movies. Like they suppress the companies so that the director cannot get any money. So like in Korea, the public, like people, they gather their own money to make the movie come out. So as you said, like using social media and like power of public will be like the best way for solve that problem. And I really like your work, so
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this work. I just wanted to know if you've considered collaborating with people who own servers and or hackers who might be able to extend the period of time during which those posts are there so that they cannot be deleted. And the last question was, or comment rather, is you might want to delete that part about, or edit out from here, the section when you said that there are activists that will be detained for X number of days, but one activist is not detained. So that strategy might be used to, yeah, you get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The live stream is over.
Okay. More questions?
Is that it? We done? We good?
What?
Finish up?
I think, do you have anything else you want to say?
I think I've pretty much said a lot. I was the one that's talking all night.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you, and thank you for the film.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.